On today's show, we're going to be talking to full-time Twitch streamer Qyune. He plays a little game called World of Warcraft in this place, and he makes a living from it. Maybe that's something you want to learn how to do too, so stick around for that. Welcome to Financial Brew. My name is Candace. As always, I will be your guide as we take one more trip into the Financial Brew. So grab your own brew, curl up, let's sit back and get right into the content.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Okay. All right. So my name's Qyune. As far as what I am, where I'm at right now, and everything, I stream on Twitch. I've been doing that for about 3-4 years, give or take. Before that, I was a mechanical engineer, and then maybe as far as like starting from the more or less the beginning here, went through, worked in the factory for a little bit, kind of figured out what I wanted to do in life, and maybe more importantly, what I didn't want to do in life, and went through, sold everything I had at one point in time, and took a huge risk to go to college to get the engineering degree. Went through, ended up getting the degree, of course. Went to work back into manufacturing from an engineering standpoint. So that was really neat as far as going through and understanding both sides of the wall a little bit. But what I realized was that similar to how I was on the line manufacturing stuff, wanting to become a little bit better and push myself further, seeing what engineers did, I started to see the same thing between engineers and project managers. And so from an engineering standpoint, or we'll start back with manufacturing. From a manufacturing standpoint, you push a button, you make a part, you take one part, you connect it to another part with a screw or a bolt. Pretty straightforward stuff. As an engineer, you're going through and you're designing stuff. You're following quite a few more processes and understanding now why some of the weird contraptions or the goofy systems are in place for the manufacturing side exist. But what I started to realize was that, those who have project management skills see things from a very high overarching kind of view. Whenever they're asking questions, I was just always really impressed with the project managers I interacted with, that they were able to go through and ask questions to get answers that they asked and answers for questions that they didn't ask. So they just had a very high level of project depth or product understanding, product depth, and then the timelines with it and the processes that those include. So after seeing that, I went through and saved up a little bit of funds and left the work, went back to college to get a master's in project management. And so while I was doing that, I wasn't able to really go to work because the work that I'm in and what that would cause for me would be a lot of travel time. So ultimately, if I was working while getting my master's, that work would end up taking me from the program, and I just wouldn't be able to finish. So it would be a net loss at the end. So I was like, well, I don't want to just do nothing. With my wife, I just don't want to be the guy that wakes up at 10 o'clock, stumbles around and finds something to do by 11 o'clock. So let me see if I can just start something. And that's where the idea of streaming came into play. While I was getting my master's, that's where I started my streaming. Since then, it's just more or less taken off from there.
Okay, so it basically initially started more as a side hustle for you.
Yeah. Especially for me, I was a little bit stricter with myself than I think most would be. But whenever I started streaming, I started at 6 a.m. in the morning. So I'd get up at 4, kind of get ready for the day, and then start at 6, stream for 6-8 hours depending on the day, and then go to class. So yeah, definitely something that was a side hustle, but it was also like just a blind dive just to see what can come out of this since we have the opportunity. Because my wife works, and I had saved up a little bit of funds, so we weren't in a position where it was trying to dig into the couch and find the last few pennies to put things together. And that's really important when talking about something as far as like Twitch is concerned, is that we were in a position where we could do something like this. If it had been different, where we were really trying to crunch funds and maybe not buy milk so that we can make the insurance payment type of thing, I would have probably dipped out after 2 weeks. You kind of get a real understanding of that flat line we were talking about earlier.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, for people who are new to Twitch, how exactly do you make money on Twitch?
So Twitch is there's really 3 overall categories. A lot of people that are unfamiliar with Twitch, I think, understand that a lot of funds come from viewers, in the sense that they sub to the channel, or they give bits, or they donate real life money through PayPal or whatever other source it is. But once you start getting up to a certain threshold, then ad revenue can start to build up a little bit. But for someone that would be starting out, that wouldn't be something I'd factor in too much at all. Because of course, the monetary gain from ads or whatever, that's going to be heavily dependent on your traffic that goes through your channel. And for someone that's just starting out with very little connections and just kind of blindly feeling their way in the way I did, I'll kind of give it an example here. My first week, I streamed 45 hours. And one thing I tried to make a couple rules for myself, and we'll get into those in a little bit, but one of the rules was to continuously talk and engage. And what I didn't want to do was be somebody that was just addicted to gaming and feeding that addiction and just videoing myself the entire time. As far as that goes, I think that's where, there's a lot of, what do you call it, personal questions someone has to ask before doing something like that. An example would be there's a lot of YouTubers that do what are called mukbangs, I think, where they sit down and they eat a meal or whatnot. Some do it and they do a fantastic job, and then they leave, they get up, they go work out, they have their regimen throughout the course of the day. But others use it to enable their addiction to food. And I think sometimes streaming and Twitch you can deceive yourself very easily with something like that. In other words, you're kind of giving yourself an excuse to say, I think I might be able to make a little bit of funds if I just give everything I can to my addiction.
Now, when you first started, what type of requirements do you need before you can even get monetized on Twitch?
Twitch it's been a while since I looked at the numbers, but they're very basic. They're very low meters, for lack of better terms. And I want to say something where you have to stream 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week. I think the number is closer to 10. I think it's pretty forgiving. And then average like 3 viewers throughout the entirety. So, if you dip down to 1 or if you spike up to 5, just as long as you have that average of 3, I think it's still 3. So it might have changed, but I think it's still 3.
Now, I suppose with you have a half decent sized audience. How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them coming back?
There's different niches within niches. Let's say, for example, if I was streaming myself eating hot sauce and trying to get a reaction out of myself, I'm going to continuously have to up each time, right? If I start out with a jalapeno, then, eventually I'm gonna have to work my way to a Carolina Reaper. And at a certain point, you're either eating 10 Carolina Reapers to kind of keep that engagement at that level, or you're doing something else entirely. Understanding my niche is that Warcraft, it's a progression game. So for those that aren't familiar, and it's a game that's been around for 15 plus years, 17 years now. And, every couple years I'll come out with a new expansion. The enemies get tougher, but your gear gets better. So you kind of continuously develop your character and whatnot. And with Warcraft, there's a lot of people that go through and they play the game at different levels. Whenever I first made the channel, I had kind of like 2 pillars of thought when it came to streaming. Number one was that I wanted it to be a channel where if somebody was playing the game or they were watching my stream, they didn't have to take their kids out the room. And, there wasn't a whole lot of cursing. There wasn't a lot of outrage. There wasn't a lot of, conversation or content in that manner. The other pillar was, regardless of your play style, regardless of how intently you played the game, I wanted it to be a place where, you can come in and talk about something that you enjoy. Between those 2 elements, presenting a manner of streaming where a parent could leave the room and they don't have to feel like they need to mute the stream or cut it out, but also conversely. And so the community it's not necessarily built around the content per se. If I go through and let's say I level a character or I gear up a character or I work on gold making, the people that are there in my stream are there for the environment, regardless of the content type of presentation. So that's kind of the approach I've taken with it.
I noticed one of the main themes of your channel is collecting all the things. Where did that idea come from?
It's funny you say that, because whenever I first started streaming, so I started streaming on YouTube. The reason I had moved to Twitch was that YouTube struggled with the technical side of things. Chat would freeze, or after 3 hours you would just automatically disconnect. When I was over there, I did what was called Iron Man content. It's a very narrow niche of gameplay within Warcraft where you pretty much level up a character, but you try not to die the entire time. Well, I'd go through and make a character, and eventually it would die, And so there's no real like permanent sense of progressing within the game. It started to get a little bit older, and by the time you get that 30th character that's died or whatnot, you don't really have much to show for it. It leaves a little bit more of a gap. So going into the opposite side of the spectrum, instead of focusing on Iron Man content, focus more so on collecting stuff. Whenever I go through and I earn a mount, or I collect a pet, or I collect a new armor piece appearance, that's progress on a permanent level. Both categories are very narrow niches, and that's been kind of the running theme when it comes down to the stream as well. It's that very narrow niche within the Warcraft Twitch environment.
Now, let's ask a little bit about the future here. When it comes to WoW, WoW's been through. So, what do you see as your future if, let's say, WoW decided to peter out? Do you see WoW perhaps changing into something completely different down the road?
As far as like it's differing from its current environment, it kind of depends on what kind of direction you want to go with that. If, let's say, for example, a lot of people come to my stream and talk about like a quote unquote WoW 2, where they would like to see better graphics. Better in this sense, implying that it's more realistic graphics. I don't think Warcraft will venture too far down that road. If they go through and they make something where it is much more realistic, I think it'd be just a different game entirely. In short, to answer the question, I think we'd see another 3, 4, 5 expansions in the same kind of presentation and manner that we have right now.
Let's go down a rabbit hole.
Right.
Are you familiar at all with the metaverse?
So I saw the term, and when I saw it, I have to admit I did not know what that meant. But I think where that is, or where that's going, is that's more along the lines metaverse, meaning that it's like a virtual reality, like you're putting on a set
Yeah.
of goggles or a helmet, and you're mentally in the game. I don't see Warcraft itself going down that road, but I see the next big MMO being something of that level, because I think for the MMO, you're going to have to come out with something very, very different like that, where either you put on a helmet and you're literally in the game and you're playing it, and it's a whole like a completely different world. I think a different route that it's going to go is that we're starting to get into what are quantum computers, I think. And quantum computers are servers, maybe, are something where it takes in multiple inputs, like hundreds and thousands of inputs, and presents a result. So let's say, for example, if I go through and I make a character and I have a quest to save an old lady's cat, I go through and I save that cat. Well, then she might have another quest for the next person to go through and find cat food, and then the next person to go through and maybe talk to her neighbor and see if they need help. The game continuously evolves as the player base, experiences and whatnot. I think you're going to have to get something like that to kind of break out of the MMO genre category as it is right now, because right now Warcraft owns it.
Back to the metaverse, just the way gaming is starting to happen in the metaverse. You can play a game, but you're also earning crypto tokens while you're playing. So you're basically making money. If you had a metaverse version of WoW, when you're doing your gold farming with your old equipment, instead of putting it on their auction house for in-game gold, you could actually put it in the AH for whatever the in-game token is, which you could then sell in the real world for money if that's what you wanted to do. So a lot of games are starting to move in there, and it's just turning into a massive thing. So I guess from my perspective, I can't see Blizzard ignoring it when the games that are getting into the metaverse are making crazy amounts of money.
I think there is a lot of potential there, especially when you can tie into, we were talking about, someone going through and using their addiction as an excuse to stream. If you can monetarily find some sort of a gain from wanting to play a game, yeah, that's a pretty big avenue of opportunity there. The catch, though, is that how it's presented. So right now in Warcraft, you can get to the in-game content, right? It might take a little bit, but you can get to where you have millions of gold, or you can get to where you're in the upper echelons of the raid tier. You can catch up and collect everything that there is to collect. It comes down to cryptocurrency. Is that to go through and uncover those coins gets progressively more and more difficult. For a game to come out with some sort of content like that and be sustainable would be really interesting to see, because you have to make it inviting for new players to come in and have that same feel of progression that your original players did. Because in Warcraft, there's people out there that have hundreds of millions of gold. I myself have a good bit as well, but the majority of the player base probably has less than 50,000 gold. gold to kind of give things a little bit of a scale there, but they can still play the game and they can still conduct their activities unhampered and not be slowed down. If I go through and let's say the guy that has 100 million gold completes a quest and gets 29 gold, that doesn't mean that whenever I complete the quest after him, that I'm going to get 17 gold. I'm also going to get 29 gold. So as long as they can keep that permanence of progression and quote unquote fairness for all the player bases, maybe that has potential. It really has to. I think it's all in how they do it.
There is this one game, it's called Axie Infinity, Philippines. The amount of money that people are making from this game, a lot of them have left their jobs and they're doing it full time. And apparently it's now making a significant part of the Philippine gross national product. So it's interesting. I'm looking forward myself to seeing how this all evolves.
Yeah, and that's really, really interesting, to be honest. Is it just Philippines or is it throughout Asia as well?
I think you can see it. I think Philippines is where it's caught on the most, but it's becoming a big game just for the fact that it's called Axie, AXIE, Infinity.
Infinity. Yeah, I'll look that up.
So yeah, it's an interesting game.
Whenever you said that, especially with the Philippines, so I guess a little bit about me. I've lived in the Philippines. I've lived in Panama, military kid. So I've lived in these places like this. What's interesting, as far as I'll kind of paint a little bit of a picture. In the U.S., when we got hit by hurricanes, right? Any hurricane, just name one. Katrina is typically what comes up to mind. There were some pretty rough stories with Katrina. There were people that lost their homes, and they didn't have a chance to recover. By and large, I think within the U.S., a lot of people were taken care of. A lot of people had their insurance. A lot of people had the stadiums to go through and live in for a little bit. Some of the typhoons would go through the Philippines. You would go through and you have a family that would have a home, and many of those homes are put together by remnant materials. And a lot of the families that live there, whenever those homes are gone, whenever they're blown down, that's it. You went from Monday, you had a job, you had a home, you had something that you came home to and whatnot, and then Friday you're homeless, and that's it. So I think for games like that, where the economy is the way it is, and you can go through and you can, you can make a living with 1,000, 5,000 pesos per day, and have some sort of living means there, especially as you're going through and you're working a couple of different jobs or doing something in the meantime. That has a lot of potential. I'd be really interested to see how it does in like Canada or the US or Europe, and because I think for the metaverse type of gaming, you'd have to have a lot of stars line up for it to really take off. I think from what it sounds like, to really take off in North America or EU, and that in of itself I don't think is saying too much, because if you have 100,000 people playing and they're in the Philippines or they're in Belgium, that's still 100,000 people playing. I think it has potential, but it'd just be interesting to see how well it takes off.
Now, one interesting thing, and I meant to mention this a little earlier, when you got married a few years ago, you had a whole giant celebration inside of WoW. What was that all about?
So I'm trying to keep in mind that a lot of you that are with Candace's community here are not familiar with Warcraft. So, and your character is essentially you, whether you go through and you're a warrior one day or a mage the next day or whatnot, but you essentially run around in an environment where you're kind of continuously trying to progress your character's gold, armor, strength, whatever, but you're doing it in an environment where there's other people doing it with you. So kind of holding that thought for a second, going back to me and Lady Q, me and the wife. So we got married during the pandemic. We want to get married, and we're going to just have me, myself, my parents, essentially less than 7, 8 people there, and have a real life wedding, and then have a real life celebration when all this starts to settle down. That being said, to have a little bit of a temporary between now and then kind of celebration, we got together with the community in game and just went around and took a bunch of screenshots. And there was about 40, 50 of us, and we would take pictures, what we call in game in Warcraft screenshots, but we would all take pictures together. And I think it was about a 2-hour event. We got all in the same sort of outfit. We did black pants, blue shirt, just because that was the easiest to do for everybody. And we went through and took various screenshots throughout the course of our journey from one city to another, and it was a lot of fun. Really, really meant a lot to Lady Q. It did for me as well, but it really made her day, her week. Oh, and one thing I did want to offer for you, your community. So we've talked a little bit about Twitch and whether or not to start it up, and we've really just scratched the surface when it comes to whether or not you should or should not. My door is always open as far as Discord goes or Twitter. If someone wanted a little bit of advice or what to look out for or whatnot, there's a million different videos as far as like, make sure your sound's good. Here's your videos. Here's your software. There's thousands of videos out there for that. Just for a is this good for me type of conversation, more than happy to to keep the door open for that.
Final question for you as well. What is the future for you?
I've been very, very lucky, as far as going through and making a channel that has gotten to this point in time. It's something where because of I need to find a different word. We'll say disease. That way we don't have
I've been calling it the human malware event.
Human malware event. We'll call it that too. Because of that, the stream's been a very nice little avenue to go through and sink time and effort into. I've been extremely fortunate with the community that I have and the environment that I'm in, just to be surrounded with good people that go through and participate in the same level of content that I do. And not only has the channel grown, but also because of other people kind of getting into it and because of other streams starting to emerge, the entire genre has started to grow as well. But within the game, because it's as old as it is, and because it has as many raids or mounts or pets or what we call transmogs, which are just armor appearances, there's been a growing niche within the community of going through and collecting things. Whether your account's 2 weeks old or 12 years old or even older than that, whenever you go through and you collect stuff within the game, it's yours permanently. So as far as that goes, we'll see what the future holds.
Well, I definitely want to thank you on behalf of my whole community for spending some time with us here today.
Yeah, no, thank you. And ultimately enjoy what you do, because if you don't, it's just going to be a long, miserable, frustrating process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's the same thing with YouTube as well. You've got to really, when you start any kind of broadcasting venture, just broadcast, just do it. Once the money starts coming along, then start buying the fancy equipment.
And that's been advice I've given as well, is that if you're interested in doing something like this, honestly, just do it, and see where that takes you from there. The example I tend to use for something like this is that you have two individuals. You have, we'll say, I don't know, Bill and Bob, I guess. So Bill and Bob want to go through and they want to get into rock climbing. So weekend one rolls around, Bill goes out there and he just haphazardly makes his way up the rocks. Bob, on the other hand, goes in and says, all right, well, according to the websites I've read, I need to get some rock climbing gear. So I need some anchors. I need some $1 million shoes to make sure I don't cut my feet. I need to go through and get some, some other items that are going to take a little bit of money to purchase and make our way out there. And then, weekend two comes around, Bill gets back out there again and starts climbing, but gets a little bit further. But this time Bill went through and said, well, I cut my hand last time, so I want to buy some gloves. Whereas now Bob is over here and he's like, all right, well, the equipment came in. I have about, 50 pounds worth of equipment, and I started rock climbing, and now I don't know what my equipment's doing for me because I don't know what I was missing to begin with. And that's where your experience comes in. And so, it's one of those things where the guy that just got out there and tried it and saw, is it something that they even like before they invest into it? Is it, going to be 1,000 times further because he's already gotten sore. He's already kind of start to build up the calluses that's needed. There's things that money can't get you that knowledge will, that that's going to be in every genre of whatever it is that you do. So, in going through and looking at this, if it's something that you're interested in, just get in there and do it and see how it is, see how you like it. It's a very low cost entry. Eventually, if you're looking at people that have 2,000, 10,000 more, viewers, invest in your product a little bit and, upgrade your camera or go through and have a little bit of a schedule or presentation or whatever. But if you're just getting into it, there's no reason to have a $1,000 camera. Just pop on the stream, learn how it works first, and then go from there.
Well, definitely definitely some good advice. See, there'll be a little edit back there.
Yep.
All right.
If only you could take that from streams.
Exactly. Well, anyway, thank you once again for coming on the stream. It's been a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah,
and
thank you for having
I'm
me.
sure you'll hear it from at least one or two of the folks following.
Like I said, you're more than welcome to ask. Discord, Twitter, doors always open. It's just, it's, should I do this type of questions are always going to be very personal and be very conditional on your circumstances.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you once again.
Of course, all of Qyune's links will be found down below. Before you go, make sure you hit like, subscribe, hit that bell if you want to know when I come up with new videos. And we'll see you again very soon in the Financial Verse.